You've probably felt it before. That moment when someone says something that cuts deep, something designed to make you react, to make you feel small, to pull some kind of emotional response out of you. Maybe it was a subtle insult wrapped in a joke. Maybe it was a passive-aggressive comment at work. Or maybe it was someone questioning your choices, your intelligence, your worth, in front of other people. And in that moment, you feel it rising inside you, that heat in your chest, that tightness in your throat, that overwhelming urge to defend yourself, to explain, to make them understand that they're wrong about you. Your heart starts racing, your palms might even get sweaty, and you can feel yourself preparing for battle. You want to fight back, to prove yourself, to show them they can't treat you like that. But here's what nobody tells you. The moment you react, the moment you engage, the moment you let them see that they got to you, you've already lost. Because human nature, in its rawest and most primitive form, doesn't reward the person who feels everything and shows it. Human nature rewards the person who feels nothing, or at least appears to feel nothing. The person who can sit there, completely unmoved while chaos swirls around them. The person whose face remains a mask of calm indifference while others are desperately trying to crack them open and get inside their head. And this isn't some philosophical theory. This is observable reality playing out in every social interaction you've ever witnessed. Think about the people you've seen who command respect without even trying. They're not the ones jumping to defend themselves. They're not the ones raising their voices or getting visibly upset. They're the ones who remain still, who seem almost bored by attempts to provoke them, who respond to attacks with silence or with a look that says, "I'm not even going to dignify that with a response." And somehow, impossibly, everyone around them feels the power radiating from that stillness. If you're tired of being the person whose emotions are always on display, if you're exhausted from constantly reacting to every little provocation, if you want to finally understand why some people seem untouchable while you feel like an open wound that everyone keeps poking, then stay with me, because what I'm about to show you will fundamentally change how you navigate every human interaction for the rest of your life. There's a concept that most people never truly grasp, a pattern of human behavior that's been observed for thousands of years, but rarely articulated in a way that makes it actionable. Ancient Stoic philosophers understood it when they talked about being unmoved by external events. Machiavelli hinted at it when he discussed the importance of appearing strong and unshakable. Modern psychologists study it when they examine emotional regulation and social dominance hierarchies. But at its core, it's about understanding a brutal truth about human nature. We are wired, at the most primitive level of our psychology, to test each other constantly. We probe for weakness, we push boundaries, we throw out provocations to see who will crack and who will hold firm. And the people who crack, who show their emotional underbelly, who react with visible hurt or anger or defensiveness, immediately drop in the social hierarchy, not because they're bad people, but because they've revealed that they can be controlled. They've shown that their emotional state is dependent on external validation, that their sense of self can be destabilized by a few well-placed words. And human nature, in its cold and calculating assessment, marks them as vulnerable. On the other hand, the person who can receive an insult, a provocation, a direct attack on their character, and respond with absolute calm or even strategic silence, that person has just demonstrated something far more powerful than any comeback or clever retort ever could. They've shown that they exist in a completely different psychological space, one where your opinion of them doesn't penetrate, where your attempts to diminish them bounce off like rain on stone. And everyone around them, whether consciously or unconsciously, registers this display of internal fortress and adjusts their behavior accordingly. Respect flows toward the unmoved. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like in real life, because understanding it intellectually is one thing, but seeing it play out is something else entirely. Imagine you're in a meeting at work. There's that one colleague who always has something to say, always needs to position themselves as superior, always looking for an opportunity to make someone else look small so they can look big. You present an idea, something you've worked hard on, something you believe in, and before you even finish explaining it, they jump in with a dismissive comment. They say something like, "Well, I'm not sure you've really thought this through," or "That's an interesting approach, but I think we need someone with more experience handling this." Or they might even go for the subtle character assassination. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but maybe we should let the grown-ups handle the strategic decisions." Now here's where most people make the fatal mistake. They immediately feel that spike of anger and humiliation. They feel themselves shrinking in front of everyone. And then, because they can't stand that feeling, they try to fight their way out of it. They start explaining themselves. They start defending their idea with increasing desperation. They might say, "No, you don't understand. Let me clarify," or "Actually, I did think about that. Here's why it works." Or they might even get personal and say, "I've been here just as long as you have. My ideas are just as valid." And with every word, with every defensive statement, they're handing more power to the person who attacked them. Because now everyone in the room can see that the attack landed, that it drew blood, that this person's emotional state is completely dependent on being validated and defended. The attacker sits back with a satisfied smile. Mission accomplished. But now imagine a different response, one rooted in understanding how human nature actually works. The same attack comes, the same dismissive comment designed to make you look incompetent in front of everyone. But instead of reacting, instead of defending, instead of showing any sign that it affected you, you simply pause. You look at the person for a beat longer than is comfortable. Not with anger, not with hurt, but with a kind of neutral assessment, the way you might look at a child throwing a tantrum. And then you continue with what you were saying as if they hadn't spoken at all. Or maybe you acknowledge it with the briefest response, "An interesting perspective, thank you," and then move on without giving it any weight or importance. What just happened? You refused to play the game. You refused to give them the emotional reaction they were fishing for. You demonstrated, through your complete lack of defense, that their opinion doesn't have the power to destabilize you. And everyone in that room, whether they realize it or not, just witnessed a display of psychological strength that trumps any clever comeback. Because you showed that you exist in a space where you don't need anyone's approval, where attacks don't land because there's nothing for them to land on. You're not playing defense. You're not even playing the game. You're operating from a completely different set of rules. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with yourself. How many times have you replayed a conversation in your head, hours, or even days after it happened? That conversation where someone said something that made you feel small, where you felt attacked or dismissed, and you didn't know what to say in the moment. So you go home and you lie in bed, and you run through all the perfect responses you could have given. You create entire scenarios where you destroy them with logic, where you make them look stupid, where you finally get the respect you deserved. If this has happened to you, if you know exactly what I'm talking about, I want you to leave a comment right now. Just write, "I've been there." That's it. You don't need to explain the situation. You don't need to share details if you don't want to. Just write those 3 words, "I've been there." Because here's what happens when you do that. You realize you're not alone. You see hundreds, maybe thousands of other people commenting the same thing, and suddenly, that pain you've been carrying, that feeling that there's something wrong with you, it starts to lose its power. You understand that it's not a personal weakness, it's not a character flaw. It's simply that nobody ever taught you how to handle these situations. So go ahead, write in the comments, "I've been there," and leave your mark. Because your comment might be exactly what someone else needs to read today to feel less alone. And while you're at it, know that what I'm about to teach you next is going to change how you handle every one of these situations from this point forward. Now let's talk about why feeling nothing, or more accurately, appearing to feel nothing, is such a powerful position in any social dynamic. And I need to be very clear here. I'm not talking about becoming a sociopath. I'm not suggesting you actually eliminate your emotions or stop caring about things that matter. What I'm talking about is strategic emotional control, the ability to choose when and how you display emotion. And more importantly, the ability to not display emotion when someone is trying to manipulate you into reacting. Because here's the thing about human nature that most people never fully grasp. Emotion is currency in social interactions. When you show someone they have the power to make you angry, hurt, defensive, or upset, you've just handed them leverage over you. You've essentially told them, here's my button, push it whenever you want to control me. And people, consciously or unconsciously, will absolutely use that leverage. They'll push that button again and again because it gives them a sense of power and control. But when you refuse to give them that emotional currency, when you remain unmoved by their provocations, you're doing something that most people never experience in their entire lives. You're establishing yourself as someone who cannot be manipulated through emotional tactics. And this is where it gets really interesting, because human nature has a hierarchy built into it. We instinctively respect people who are harder to move, harder to shake, harder to control. It's a survival mechanism that goes back to our tribal days. The person who stays calm under pressure, who doesn't panic, who doesn't get rattled by threats or insults, that's the person you want to follow. That's the person you want on your side, because they're not going to make decisions based on emotional reactivity. They're solid, they're reliable, they're strong. And conversely, the person who falls apart at the slightest provocation, who gets visibly upset when challenged, who needs constant reassurance and validation, that person registers in our primitive brain as weak, as unreliable, as someone who will crack when things get difficult. It's not fair, it's not kind, but it's how human nature operates at its most basic level. Let me give you another example, this time in a more personal context. You're at a family gathering and there's always that one family member who knows exactly how to get under your skin. They make comments about your life choices, your career, your relationships, your appearance. Little digs that are designed to look like concern or jokes but are really attacks meant to establish dominance and make themselves feel superior by making you feel inferior. Most people respond in one of two ways. Either they get defensive and start justifying their choices, or they attack back and the whole thing becomes a toxic cycle. But both of those responses are playing the game on their terms, and you're always going to lose when you play on someone else's terms. The true power move, the response that comes from understanding human nature at its core, is to give them nothing. They make a comment about your job. You smile slightly and say, "Interesting observation," and then you turn to someone else and change the subject. They try to probe your relationship status. You give the most minimal, bland response possible, "We're doing fine," and offer nothing more. No explanation, no justification, no defense. They try to compare you to your more successful sibling. You nod thoughtfully and say, "Yeah, they're doing great, aren't they?" And then you ask someone about their recent vacation. What are you doing in each of these responses? You're refusing to engage with the frame they're trying to establish. You're not defending, because defending means you've accepted that you need to justify yourself to them. You're not attacking back because that means you've accepted the emotional game they're playing. You're simply existing in a space where their provocations have no power, because you're not giving them any emotional energy to feed on. And here's what happens, and you can observe this if you pay attention. The person making the attacks will actually escalate at first. They'll try harder to get a reaction because your lack of response is confusing to them. They've been trained by years of interactions with other people that this tactic works, that people will defend themselves or get upset. But when you continue to give them nothing, when you remain this immovable object, something shifts. They start to realize, maybe consciously but probably unconsciously, that they have no power over you. And that realization changes the entire dynamic. They might try a few more times, but eventually they stop because there's no reward for their behavior. Attacking someone who doesn't react is like punching a cloud. There's nothing solid to hit, so it becomes pointless. And more importantly, everyone else watching this interaction has just seen you demonstrate a level of self-possession and internal security that's rare. You didn't need to prove anything. You didn't need to defend yourself. You just existed calmly and unmoved while someone tried and failed to shake you. That's power. This concept extends into every area of life where power dynamics exist, which is essentially everywhere humans interact. In romantic relationships, the person who cares less, or appears to care less, has more power. I know that sounds cynical, and in an ideal world it wouldn't be true. But human nature doesn't care about ideals. It cares about patterns that have worked for survival and reproduction for millennia. When you're the person who's always seeking validation, always needing reassurance, always reacting emotionally to every little thing your partner does or doesn't do, you're in a weak position. Not because you're a bad person, but because you've made yourself vulnerable to manipulation. You've shown that your emotional state is dependent on their actions. But when you're the person who maintains your own center, who doesn't spiral when they don't text back immediately, who doesn't need constant affirmation of their worth, who can be perfectly content whether the relationship is going smoothly or hitting a rough patch, you're operating from strength. And strength, real internal strength, is magnetic. It draws people toward you because it's so rare. Most people are walking around as exposed nerve endings, ready to react to everything. When someone encounters a person who isn't, who seems to have this solid core that external circumstances can't penetrate, it's fascinating. It's attractive. It commands respect. In professional settings, this dynamic is even more pronounced. The person who can sit in a tense meeting, receive criticism or challenges, and respond with calm rationality rather than emotional defensiveness, that person is immediately elevated in everyone's estimation. The person who panics, who gets visibly flustered, who starts talking faster and defending themselves with increasing desperation, that person has just shown everyone in the room that they can be rattled. And once people know you can be rattled, they'll rattle you. Not necessarily because they're evil, but because it's an effective tactic for establishing dominance in social hierarchies. This is raw human nature playing out. We test each other. We probe for weakness. And we adjust our behavior based on what we find. Now here's where this gets even more nuanced and more powerful. The goal isn't to actually feel nothing, because that would make you a psychopath. And psychopaths, despite what movies might suggest, generally don't do well in the long term because they lack the ability to form genuine connections and understand consequences. The goal is to create a strategic gap between what you feel internally and what you display externally. You can feel anger, hurt, frustration. All of that is natural and human. But you don't have to show it, especially not in the moment when someone is trying to manipulate you into showing it. This is what the ancient Stoics understood when they talked about the dichotomy of control. You can't control what other people say or do, but you absolutely can control how you respond. And the most powerful response in almost every situation where someone is testing you or trying to provoke you is no response at all, or the minimal response necessary to acknowledge and move on. There's a concept in martial arts, particularly in Aikido, about using your opponent's energy against them. When someone attacks you, instead of blocking directly or attacking back, you redirect their energy and let their own force work against them. The same principle applies in psychological warfare, which is what most social conflict really is. When someone attacks you verbally or emotionally, they're expending energy. They're putting force out into the world. If you meet that force with your own force, defending or attacking back, you create a collision, and both of you sustain damage. But if you simply step aside, if you refuse to be the target they're aiming at, their energy dissipates into nothing. They've swung at air. And they look foolish doing it, especially if you remain calm and composed while they're visibly worked up. This is why the phrase "never let them see you sweat" exists. It's not just about physical comfort, it's about psychological dominance. The moment someone sees that they've gotten to you, they know. They have power over you. The moment you show you're unaffected, you've claimed the power position. Let me address something that often comes up when people first encounter this idea. They say, but isn't this just being fake? Isn't this just suppressing your emotions, which is unhealthy? And the answer is no. This isn't about suppression. It's about timing and strategy. There's a huge difference between suppressing emotions, which means pushing them down and pretending they don't exist, and regulating emotions, which means feeling them fully but choosing when and how to express them. When someone provokes you in public, in a meeting, at a family gathering, wherever there are other people watching and social dynamics at play, reacting emotionally in that moment is almost always a strategic mistake. It gives them what they want, it makes you look weak, and it doesn't solve anything. But that doesn't mean you suppress the emotion. You feel it fully. You acknowledge it internally. Maybe later, in private, you process it through journaling, talking to a trusted friend, exercise, whatever works for you. And if the issue genuinely needs to be addressed, you address it later, when you're calm, when you're in control, when you can approach it rationally rather than reactively. That's not being fake. That's being intelligent about emotional management. It's the difference between a child who screams and cries the moment they feel upset, and an adult who feels the upset but chooses how to respond to it. Most people never make that transition. They're still operating at the emotional level of children, reacting immediately and visibly to every provocation. And then they wonder why they're not respected, why they're not taken seriously, why people keep pushing their buttons. It's because they've never learned to master this fundamental aspect of human nature. There's also a deeper layer to this that connects to personal power and self-worth. When you feel the need to defend yourself constantly, when you can't stand to let a criticism or insult go unanswered, what you're really revealing is that your sense of self is fragile and dependent on external validation. You need everyone to understand you, to agree with you, to see you the way you see yourself, because if they don't, your entire self-concept starts to crumble. That's a terrifying way to live, because it means you're constantly at the mercy of other people's opinions. But when you can hear someone say something negative about you, something that's designed to hurt or diminish you, and you can just let it exist without needing to correct it or fight against it, you're demonstrating something profound. You're demonstrating that your sense of self is internal and solid, not external and fragile. You know who you are. You know what you're worth. And someone else's incorrect opinion doesn't threaten that foundation, because the foundation is built on something deeper than what people think of you. This is what true confidence looks like. It's not loud, it's not showy. It's not constantly proclaiming how great you are. True confidence is quiet. It's still. It's unmoved by the winds of other people's judgments. And people can sense it. They might not be able to articulate what they're sensing, but they feel it. They feel that solidity, that groundedness, and they respect it because it's so rare. Here's your 7-day challenge, and this is where theory becomes practice. For the next 7 days, I want you to conduct an experiment with your own behavior. Every time someone says something to you that would normally trigger a defensive response, an explanation, a justification, I want you to pause, count to 3 in your head, and then respond with the absolute minimum. If you can, say nothing at all and just move on to something else. If you need to acknowledge it, do so in the most brief and emotionless way possible. Interesting, I'll think about that. Or simply, okay, nothing more. No elaboration, no defense, no explanation. And here's the crucial part. I want you to notice what happens. Notice how the other person reacts when they don't get the emotional response they were expecting. Notice how other people who witnessed the interaction respond. Notice how you feel afterward. Do you feel weaker for not defending yourself? Or do you actually feel stronger? Do you feel like you lost respect? Or do you sense a subtle shift in how people treat you? This exercise is going to be uncomfortable at first, because you're fighting against years of conditioning that tells you that you need to defend yourself, that staying silent means accepting defeat. But push through that discomfort. Because on the other side of it, you're going to discover something powerful. You're going to discover that most of the things you thought you needed to defend against weren't worth defending against at all. You're going to discover that your power increases when you stop trying to prove it. And you're going to discover that human nature, in all its raw and calculating assessment, rewards the person who needs nothing from others, because that person has everything they need within themselves. If you made it this far, it means something in this video resonated with you. And I know exactly what you're feeling right now. That mixture of relief from finally understanding what's been happening, and at the same time that anxiety of wondering, can I really change this? Can I really become the person who doesn't get shaken? I want to tell you something. You're not alone in this. There are thousands of people on this channel who are exactly where you are right now. People who used to wake up with that tightness in their chest, who used to lose sleep replaying conversations, who used to feel small and powerless when confronted by others. And today, they're different. Not because they became different people, but because they learned to position themselves, to occupy their own space, to stop bending under pressure. And you know how it started? With the decision to stop accepting crumbs of respect and start building real presence. Here on this channel, every week I bring content like this, practical strategies you can apply immediately, insights into the psychology of power that will completely change how you relate to people. It's not about becoming cold or arrogant. It's about reclaiming what was always yours, the right to exist without asking permission. If this makes sense to you, if you're tired of being pushed around and you finally want to learn to position yourself with strength and dignity, then subscribe to this channel. Hit that button below. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos, because each video is a piece in this transformation journey. And if this content helped you in any way, if you felt like finally someone understands what you're going through, leave your like here, so more people who need this message can find this video. I'll see you in the next one, and remember, you don't need to explain yourself to anyone anymore.